Welcome back. Well, for a country with an awful lot of talk about building more homes, Canada isn't doing particularly well. Here's a look by the numbers. There were 243,957 starts in March, down 1.6% from February. Adjusting for seasonality, total starts across Canada were even worse at 242,195. That's a decline of 7% from February. New ground on multi-family buildings sent Vancouver starts up a healthy 27%, but the opposite was true in Toronto, where starts fell 26%, and in Montreal, where they dropped 5%. And current levels are well below their previous peak when 321,000 units broke ground back in March of 2021. That's despite average prices coming down slightly to $719,000 in February across the country. Rental rates rose in March to an average of $2,181. That is an increase of 8.8% from the previous year. The story of expensive homes and high rents in Canada is hardly new. Efforts have been underway for a couple of years now to build more supply and bring prices down, which makes the housing starts number even worse. Bob Dugan is chief economist at CMHC. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So I do want to ask why we don't see higher starts. They're not terrible by historical standards, but given all of the emphasis on building, they're pretty terrible.
Absolutely. We need a lot more, in fact. When we talk about a supply gap of, 3.5 million additional homes that have to be built by 2030, it means we have to, about double the pace of housing starts. And, we've seen them come down in recent years. Back in 2021, it was 271,000 starts were built. Then, the year after, 260. Last year was 240. This year, we're forecasting about 225,000 starts. So it's historically high, but we're going in the wrong direction.
Any thoughts, Bob, about what would change that? We've seen tons of talk. We've seen government policies aimed at this. We've seen incentives to the builders themselves. What more could be done that hasn't been done?
I think what really needs to happen is I don't think we can build the starts with business as usual construction techniques. We're going to need innovation in the sector. We've already got a fairly high percentage of our GDP going to residential investment. We have a lot of construction workers there. It's not the unemployment rate has come up, but it's only 6.1%. We can't just double down on the amount of labor. We have to invest more in coming up with innovative ways of building. And if we don't do that, it's going to be constrained going forward as well. So I think technology innovation is really what's going to be behind any kind of meaningful improvement in the level of supply.
We do know in those places there have been investments made, certainly policies described. I don't know how far along we are by putting dollars to work. They take time. Is the glass half full way to look at this data, Bob, that there will be a payoff a year or two from now, or is that just a little bit too naive?
It does take time. You're right. A great example is if you want to, build a new rental apartment in the Toronto area, from the time you have the idea until the time people are moving in, it can take 8 to 10 years. And so you need strategies in the shorter term. And we see some of that in the budget with, efforts to try to promote more gentle densification, incentives to build secondary suites. These are the kinds of things that can be done in the shorter term while we're waiting for longer term, more permanent supply to come on board. So I think it's a case where you have to try different things and to try to get, some more immediate supply while you're waiting for the longer term supply. It just, there's no one solution fits all.
We only about 20 seconds here, but CMHC has described the multi-million gap in housing that we have. At what point do you say we're not going to make it? Even if we pick up the pace of building, we just won't meet that gap.
You know what? I think all along we said that it's going to be very difficult to achieve. And so we're setting the bar very high by saying this is what we need to build and hopefully it'll get done. And it's to create awareness about the problem. So whether or not we build the additional 3.5 million homes, I think we've kind of created consensus around the idea that it needs to be done. So people's minds are on supply. Policy is on supply now. A few years ago, we were looking at more demand-side policies for housing. And so I think all the minds are working on the right problems, and it's a question of getting it solved.
Bob, so good to have you for this. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Bob Dugan is chief economist at CMHC. Higher interest rates can keep buyers on the sidelines, and of course, they also affect developers and their willingness to invest. So are current incentives to build enough to keep new units being created? Kevin Lee is Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Homebuilders Association. Kevin, thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So when we look at the starts data, it is clear, and it's uneven across the country, but we're not seeing, record levels of starts. They may be healthy enough in a historical context, but what do builders need in order to build more?
Yeah, they need quite a bit, actually. I mean, we've gotten into this situation of not enough housing starts and a big housing deficit because of a broad variety of factors. As you mentioned off the top, obviously higher interest rates are one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now. But you've got to look at municipal approvals as well, zoning, infrastructure investments. We're facing labor challenges, so the list is pretty broad. But probably the most important thing to really get things moving at this stage would be hopefully interest rates will come down, and the changes of mortgage rules that we got in the last budget announcement will help. So quite a bit to go still.
So let's focus on interest rates for a second here. How sensitive are builders and the investors behind them, right? Because some of these projects require investors willing to take risks. How sensitive is the whole industry to that change in rates? And I'm asking that because when rates do come down, Kevin, I think we all know they'll come down a little bit, but they're not going to go back to where they were anytime soon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's no question that it is an industry, it is a market that is incredibly sensitive to interest rates. And, we saw that, through 2021 and 2022 when we had historic low interest rates and we had, huge numbers in terms of housing starts. In 2021, we were at 271,000 housing starts, which was the second highest on record and only off by a couple thousand off the highest. So, you really saw that. And then, despite other challenges, we continued very well in the next year. And then as soon as interest rates went up, we saw the immediate drop. And so you see that in starts and the, to your point about, the development side, especially when you look at high-rise developments that just have a much longer build-out. Part of the reason we didn't see a complete plummeting of housing starts last year was because we had projects that had been approved already prior to high interest rates. But since they've been up as they have been, we certainly expect a continued slowdown in the multifamily high-rise sector, and not just for this year, but the next couple of years because of the time it takes to get going on those.
One of the things that jumps out of the data is that those multi-unit builds in Vancouver, for instance, are alive and well. The numbers are great there. Not so in Toronto or Montreal or other places. What is BC doing differently, and should other places be mimicking it?
Yeah, well, I think also, that's a bit of a short-term data piece. I think that Vancouver and the Lower Mainland does have a lot of demand still, so they might not be being hit as hard. There's no question that Ontario, through the high interest rate environment, has been hit the hardest, and because of the longer build out time I was saying earlier, and a different type of investor, there's the more of the real estate investment trusts are much more active, in the GTA, and so we're just seeing a lot of pullback given the current conditions. All
right, Kevin, so good to have you with us. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, you're very welcome.
Kevin Lee is Chief Executive Officer at the Canadian Homebuilders Association. Coming up, new warnings on individual cigarettes are here. Will smokers take them to heart? That's still ahead. But first, in a Back to the Future moment, it seems NBC may be planning to spend big to nab the rights to air NBA games, currently housed at TNT. Sorry for all the acronyms. Reports suggest the broadcaster could pay $2.5 billion a year for the games, which is more than double what TNT pays now. Call it a reminder that while traditional cable and broadcast may be struggling, live sports is a winner. All we can say to that is, quick, someone pass me a ball. Back after this.